Hi, everybody. This is Bill De La Cruz, and you're listening to the Origination Point podcast. And what I realize is, even though we've got a number of episodes, we might have some new listeners out there. So I thought I'd start with talking about why I do this, why this podcast is called the Origination Point, and then dive into some of the content I want to share with you. So, the reason I do this is I want to make the world a more humane place, one conversation at a time. And so, my goal and my why in sharing with you is to create a more humane world. And it's a why that I may never see in my lifetime, the world part of it. I do see it in individuals and in pockets of organizations that I work with, people who go from hopeless to hopeful, people who go from despair to creativity, to unwillingness, to supportive, both individually and with other people. And I chose that why because that drives me. That drives everything I do. It's why I get up in the morning. And my how and my what are what I'm sharing with you all. I've published a couple books. I'm a speaker. I speak on a national level. And the why though is really important to me. And I think that everybody has a why. And your why is your passion, it's your heart, it's what drives you to get up every morning. And if you haven't explored that, that might be something to think about. What is your why? And I'll just give you a little reminder that your why is not what you do. What you do is only a small portion of who you are. And so what you do for a purpose. And it may be part of your why. It's just not the only reason that you exist on the planet. Everybody plays a role. So I want to start with that. And my goal in sharing the information I'm going to share with you is to add value to your life. Because what I've learned about transforming and self growth is that it's skill based, and these skills are available to anyone if you choose to do the work. And if we choose to do the work, then it's really important. And that's tied into another story. When I was 18 years old, I realized that my life was way over the edge. I was on my way to going to jail. I was abusing substances. I had no friends. I created a lot of conflict. My life was, from a relational perspective, completely out of control, and I didn't know what to do. And I went to workshops and I read books, and the people at the stage or the book, they would say, just do the work. And I would say, I would love to do the work because my life is really screwed up right now. Can you tell me what the work is? And I didn't really hear, like, what is the work of personal change? What do I have to do if I want to grow out of where I am to be someone else, or to be more authentic, or to feel comfortable in my own skin? And I never really learned that. And what I did do is it started me on this journey that I'm still on 40 years later, actually 50 years later, that I'm still growing and I'm still learning, and I still am trying to figure out what is it that I'm meant to do here, and how am I meant to do it? And so it's a lifelong journey. What I learned from this, though, is that it's a skills-based approach, and the skills are accessible to anyone if you choose to do your own work. That's the most important piece, is self-change and self-growth and personal awareness. It doesn't come by just thinking about it. It doesn't come by reading a book. It doesn't come from watching a program on the internet. It only comes from doing your own work consistently and in a way that is both compassionate and respectful to yourself. In other words, you don't have to beat yourself up for being somebody that you might not like. I didn't like myself at all as that 18-year-old kid. And I knew in the back of my head that I was hurting others and I was hurting myself. And I had no skill base, I had no empathy, I had no compassion. I didn't know how to even talk to somebody or even authentically apologize for my behavior. And so, after about 20 years of doing this work and working with thousands of people over the last 20 plus years and supporting them in their personal growth, I found that there is a process. And the one thing I'll tell you is today, personal growth is like diets. There's all these fads. You can go on the internet and people are going to be selling you all kinds of shortcuts to grow. Take this and buy this program and do it, and you will be a new person in whatever, 20 days, 30 days, 60 days. And I will tell you that's not possible. There's not a program that you're going to buy that's going to replicate the work that you need to do. And what I will tell you is you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to shift your behavior and your practices and your language. It doesn't cost any money to change your mind. I'll say that again. It doesn't cost any money to change your mind. And that's where it all starts, right here. Personal change starts in our mind. Our mindset drives our outcomes. And so the mindset that I had at 18, which was very destructive, hurt, traumatized, and victim oriented, drove my outcomes. So when I interacted with people, I basically experienced them like I was. And the relationships never lasted. There was a lot of conflict. And as I started to make the shift, then I started to realize that I could attract different kind of people in my life. So one of the tips I will tell you right away is that your mindset drives your outcomes. So if you're having outcomes that you don't like or that are limited, first thing to do is to write about what's up here. Journaling is the best way. Or if you have somebody that you really trust that you can talk to that will hold your confidence, you can talk to them. Journaling, though, is an important aspect of growth because, and I'm not talking about typing, I'm talking about writing. Actually put a pen or a pencil in your hand with a piece of paper, those old-fashioned things, and write down what's going on up here, because what that does is it creates these connections to synapses in your brain that open up creativity and open up awareness. And so that's why we'll always say go old school on this one and write in a journal. And the first question you may write is, what is my mindset today? What do I think about? How do I see people? How do I experience the world? And if you do it outside of judging or shaming or blaming, it's just a stream of consciousness that you're just writing about. So that's a little bit. I'll give you more of the structure, the actual structure. There's a framework that we're going to use to go through this process. And I want to talk a little bit, though, about the book that I wrote, which is called Finding the Origination Point, Understanding Our Biases to Create a More Peaceful World. And if you listen to the end of this, there'll be a link where you can click on it and you can get a free copy of that book if you would like. The origination point is a really important aspect of our growth. And what I've learned in my own work and supporting, as I said, thousands of people over the last 20 years is that everything that we experience as adults has the beginning somewhere between birth and high school, maybe after high school age, where we either had an experience or we heard somebody talk about those people, or we were labeled something that then as we became adults, we either created a bias towards or an affinity towards or a judgment or a stereotype. And those biases, judgments, stereotypes, categorizations are impacting our interactions with people all the time. whether we're conscious of them or not. And so the idea of the origination point is that it's the place of healing and understanding. And I'll just tell you a quick story of somebody that I worked with a number of years ago. And we did a bias awareness workshop. It lasted about 4 hours. And she came up to me afterwards and she said, "I think you saved my marriage." And I was like, I never heard that story before. And I've been facilitating this work for 10 or 15 years prior to that. And I said, "Well, I would love to hear your story." She says, "I'm 35 years old. I've been married for about 3 or 4 years. And my husband and I have had just the kind of normal husband and wife conflict, nothing real serious. Until the last few months, we've been having these really intense arguments with high emotional energy, screaming and yelling." And I asked her, "So what changed in the last few months?" She said, "Well, he went from working a regular job where he was working 30, 40 hours a week to a startup that he really loves. And I'm really supportive of him being a part of this startup. And he's gone 60, 70, 80 hours a week sometimes." And what I realized going through this session, the origination point for me of all of that emotional energy is that when I was 12 years old, I was abandoned by my dad. And I never really looked at it or healed it. And so she was carrying around all of this unhealed emotional energy. And the unhealed emotional energy from conflict, whether it's internalized conflict that's created through an experience that we have on a personal level, or an externalized conflict where we have a conflict with another person or thing, if it's unhealed or unresolved, it never goes away. It stays in our being, and it comes out when there's a conflict. And so for her, all of that unresolved emotional energy from being abandoned at 12 years old came out in those arguments with her husband in her mid 30s. And so when they argued emotionally, she dropped all the way back to that 12-year-old girl who was abandoned by her dad and brought all of that unhealed emotional energy. So I was just, number one, I was really honored that she shared that story with me. And number two, I was really pleased that for her, she went so deep into the process that she connected the short time that we were together to something that was very impactful in her life. So my first question was, "Does your husband know this about you? Have you told him this story?" And she said, "No, I haven't, because I have so much shame and guilt associated with it that I've never really talked to him about it." So my first suggestion was, maybe you should share this story with him so he creates some understanding. And then my second suggestion was to think about what support you need to begin to understand and heal yourself, because even for your dad, there was a story behind what he did. And as hard as it may be to accept it or understand it, it's real. And so that's the power of this approach, is that it can connect you as an adult to things that you experienced at a very young age that are still impacting you in your interactions today. And it may be completely unaware, maybe what we call a blind spot, where it doesn't show up for you until you're interacting with people from that group. And you might walk away and wonder, what just happened here? Or why do I feel like this? And so that's the root of this whole idea of the origination point. And whether we're talking about conflict, or whether we're talking about narratives or mindsets that we have, I'll just tell you a quick story of my own. Growing up, I grew up in a home where my dad was very unhappy, didn't like being married, didn't like having kids, and started hitting me when I was 9 years old and giving me this narrative that I was worthless, I'd never amount to anything, I'd never be successful. And so the narrative that I put in my head was that I'm not worthy, I'll never be successful, and I'll never accomplish anything. And for a number of years, that was my life because that was my narrative. And it only became after where I was when I shared with you when I was 18 that I realized that if I didn't do something, I wouldn't be here today, that I started to shift that narrative. And so the way I shifted that narrative is I started to tell myself, I can accomplish anything I want to. And it took me a long time to believe that. And it took me a long time to make that shift. Where today I don't even think about whether I can accomplish something. I know that if I put my heart into whatever it is that I want to do, I will get there. And it's a daily practice. It's something I have to think about every day. It's not just magic that it stays. I wish I could tell you it was. But the reality is that this journey you will continue to be on until you're no longer here on the physical plane. And so that's where the origination point came from. So the two areas that I really like to talk about, one is called conflict transformation. And conflict transformation is different than conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is where you and I have a problem, we resolve the conflict and we go our separate ways. Conflict transformation is where you and I have a problem, we resolve the problem, and we shift the energy of our relationship so that that emotional energy that's part of our conflict gets healed and released so that neither one of us has to carry it into other relationships and into other interactions that we have. So conflict transformation is really the key because that impacts not only the issue that we have, but also impacts our relationship. And just to let you know, my qualifications for this is I've been a mediator for 30 years. So it's a skill base that I've taken from mediation and transferred it into personal growth. And so everything I'm sharing with you, I practice. It's not some pie in the sky. It's not something that I learned and don't do. I practice these skills every day because I have to keep them sharp. And so that's kind of the framework or the structure of what we're going to talk about. The second topic that I love to talk about is how our biases, judgments, and stereotypes are formed, their impact in our lives, and how we deconstruct them. Because as human beings, we'll never be completely unbiased. We'll never stop judging or stop stereotyping. What we can do, though, is increase our self-awareness. Again, work on this to increase our self-awareness so that when we do have a judgment or a bias or a stereotype towards another human being, we're able to recognize it, put it aside, and come back and be present. Because being present with each other allows us to get to know each other more authentically. And that's really the ultimate outcome for this approach. And you have to be ready for it. Some people like it and yet aren't ready. And by ready, I mean you have to be ready to change, willing to do the work every day. And another piece I'll share with you is a process called a daily practice. So anytime you choose to take a behavior or a mindset or language and shift it, this daily practice approach allows you to do it with consistency and fidelity. And the way it works is that you do your shift for a short amount of time with hyper awareness. So when I wanted to shift my mindset to I can accomplish anything, I started out doing it for 5 minutes, just telling myself, I can accomplish anything, I can accomplish anything, I can accomplish anything. And I was really aware of it. I would put notes up on around my room. I would put notes up in my car. You can accomplish anything. And at first I didn't even believe it, to be really honest. And so then I had to increase the time. So I would increase it to 10 minutes, then 15 minutes, and then half an hour, then half a day, and then all day. And then after about a couple of months, it just became part of a new mindset that I created. And so the important part is a short amount of time with hyper awareness. It could be a behavior that you want to shift. Maybe you have poor listening skills and you want to listen more deeply and listen to respond versus listening to react. So practice deep listening for 5 minutes. Practice just taking in what you're hearing without the desire to have to react to it. And so that's what a daily practice is. And so every time we come together, I'm going to ask you what your daily practice is and who can you share it with. So I think that's everything I want to share about my why and about the origination point, what I speak about, why I'm qualified to do this, and that my ultimate goal is to add value to your life and not have you spend anything but your time in the process. You might have to buy a journal if you don't have one, or a pen, and that's about all you need to really shift practices. So get off the internet, stop looking for the answer in somebody else's program, because the program you have to change is right here. It's your head and your heart. So here's the framework. It's awareness, action, accountability, and sustainability. And we're going to start with awareness. I'm not going to get into it too deeply today because we're going to have a series of podcasts that I'm going to share with you in depth, each one of those areas and what they entail. Awareness is about self-awareness. And self-awareness is about recognizing I just did something, I just said something, or I just impacted another human being in this way. And awareness is the beginning step, because if you're not aware, especially if you're not self-aware, then we don't know what it is we need to change. In my self-awareness, I realized that I had a lot to change. Pretty much everything that I did, I had to change. The way I talked, my body language, the way I blame people, the way I played a victim, the way I was egotistical, arrogant, you name it, and I was it. I was the poster child for what I now call my bad behavior. And I don't usually use identifiers like good or bad. It's just that that's how it felt at the time. What I realize is at the time I was acting out what I learned. And so in some ways it was normal, and yet in other ways it was hurtful and demeaning, because that's what I learned. And so awareness is also going back into your own childhood and starting to see what were some of the narratives that you got, what were some of the lessons that you learned, what are some of the behaviors that you saw. Because not everything, I found that I didn't have to change everything. There were some things that I learned, even in that kind of dysfunctional environment that I was in, that were helpful. Like, if you have only a few friends, then your life is rich. Things like that are still part of my life, and I learned those at a young age as well. So I want you to balance what you're aware of with both what are some of the things that you want to keep and nurture, and what are some of the things that aren't serving you. And that's the way to look at it: is what is it that's happening? What are the behaviors? What are the outcomes that are no longer serving you? And then we can get into how do we shift those. So for today, I'm going to leave you with that, just to think about awareness. And the other way that you can approach this is to get a journal and do a stream of consciousness journal, and just put on the top of the page something like early lessons, childhood lessons, something like that. And just write down all of the things that you heard about yourself, about other people, values, beliefs, lessons, things that you heard between birth and maybe high school age. And don't go back and change them. Stream of consciousness means you just write whatever it is that comes to mind, and then let it sit and then go back and see if you can pull together themes or connections to what you've written. And so the reason why that's important is that you'll go back and forth with those pieces to think about how are they affecting you now as an adult, and what are some of the shifts that you want to make. So I'm really excited to be on this journey with you. And I really also want to hear your feedback. So you'll see a link at the bottom of this podcast to our website, De La Cruz Leadership Solutions. If you click on that link, it will take you to a page where we'll ask for your information. And it'll also have a link for a free ebook, the Finding the Origination Point, Understanding Our Biases to Create a More Peaceful World. Because that book is basically what I'm talking to you about in book form. And it has a self-assessment in it. And we'll talk about that the next time we get together, what the self-assessment tool is designed to do and how it impacts your awareness and can really support the action steps that you want to take. And in doing that, I would love to hear your feedback, your questions, because as we move forward, I would love to be able to answer some of your questions during the course of the podcast. And I'm so intrigued by everyone's story that if you would like to be a part of this podcast and talk about your journey and what you're experiencing, that would be great, because I think a lot of us have shared stories or shared experiences that we don't often talk about. And in creating a more humane world means that we all have to do our work, and we have to move out of being afraid to speak our perspective, because everyone's perspective is valid. And it's time that we made a shift and realized that the trajectory that we're on will not create more connection or community. And that's a really important outcome for me. So again, I'm so excited to be on this journey with you. And when you go to our website and you want to make some comments, just let me know what would be of interest to you. And we'll do a couple of live Zoom calls. And if that would be an interest to you, that would be great, because the other outcome that we want to create is a community of people who are doing their own work to be able to come together to talk to each other about your challenges, your successes, what's worked for you, because you all have an answer to how we move through this. You all have an answer to creating a more humane world. And I'm so excited to be a part of that. And I can't wait to hear your feedback, your questions, your comments. And remember, keep growing. Thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.